It's one of the great Australian automotive rivalries, Holden versus Ford. And in the heavyweights division, we have these two big hitters, the Ford Falcon XR8 and the Holden Commodore SSV Redline. The battle line between Falcon and Commodore dates all the way back to 1978, a rivalry deeply etched into Australian history. For performance enthusiasts though, 2015 is about as good as it gets. For Ford, the new XR8 is a swan song model. It will see out the Blue Oval's manufacturing operations in Australia in October 2016. Meantime, for Holden fans, the Commodore SSV Redline will be retired in 2017. Both cars are priced at an identical $54,690 plus on-road costs and share performance gear including Brembo brakes, staggered wheel widths and dynamic focus suspension. The good news is that this car shares essentially the same underpinnings as the old GT Falcon, including that stonking 5-litre supercharged V8 engine, which essentially replaces the old FPV portfolio as the go-to Ford for rev heads. And then in the red corner we have the trusty Holden. Now, unlike the Ford, the Holden's actually due for an update this time next year, and all the speculation is pointing to a larger engine at that point in time. But until then, we've got a 6-litre naturally aspirated unit that produces 260 kilowatts in automatic guise. A classic battle always needs a classic test, the stopwatch. We begin with the Holden. And next up, the Ford. The Redline made a quicker jump off the line, but beyond that it was the XR8 that sprinted away, racing to 100 kilometers an hour in a sprightly 5.2 seconds. Now, as we saw in the 0 to 100 testing just before, there is a clear advantage for the Falcon over the Commodore in the engine stakes. In daily driving, the power comes on quite progressively, but open the tabs, straight away it's really strong from down low, and from about 4,500 RPM, you notice a real kick as the supercharger comes on full whine. Now, this new Falcon is leaps and bounds ahead of the predecessor in 2010, particularly in the handling department. For an 1,861 kilogram sedan, the steering is really sharp off centre and it's actually quite agile. It sits fairly flat through corners, though when pushed right to the limit, it can't quite match the Holden for mechanical grip. And that's despite the use of those staggered wheel widths. But you can sort of get over that when you have this much power in what is essentially just a Falcon sedan. Another clear strength for this thing has to be that engine note. One criticism though is that it's sort of droned out by all the road noise that enters the cabin, and that's sort of across the Falcon range, but you really want the engine and the supercharger to be front and centre in the noise department for this thing, but unfortunately it sort of gets droned out a bit by all the other sounds that sort of come through. But even so, there is absolutely no doubt that Ford saved its best for last with this XR8. There are some shortcomings though. The ride's fidgety, there's noticeable road noise entering the cabin at all times, and it doesn't feel special enough to really justify its $55,000 purchase price. Some of those traits are instantly remedied in the Commodore, which appears to take a markedly different approach to the Falcon. Now, the big country, big car ethos is well and truly alive in the SSV Redline. It might lack the straight-out punch and oral theatre of the XR8, but as a big lazy 8-cylinder, it is perfect for country roads. Plenty of torque from down low, and the engine's matched to a really intuitive 6-speed automatic gearbox, and for 2015 includes the addition of paddle shifters. Now, based on our experience today, the 6-speed automatic in this car is decidedly more intuitive than the XR8's. The sports mode in particular is adaptive to your driving style, so if you do give it a bit of welly through the corners, it'll know to downshift quicker, and it becomes more aggressive based on your driving habits. But it also seems that this gearbox is more inclined to using the engine's torque rather than kicking back through the gears, particularly when you choose to plant your foot. Now, out on the open road, the Commodore is a much more hushed and refined car than the Falcon. It's quieter in its road noise, but it's also more compliant over bumps and probably an easy vehicle to live with day to day. That said though, it's still quite a capable cornering machine as well. It sits flatter and there's less demand on the tyres to keep the car in good shape. And you can throw it into a corner with plenty of reassurance, knowing that it's going to do what you want it to do. But the big criticism is that there's nowhere near enough noise. Even at full revs, you can sort of hear the engine ticking over, but it should be front and centre. The Commodore also reigns supreme in the interior and technology stakes. It's got a nicer finish and more standard equipment, including the very latest safety technology. And therein lies the problem for the Falcon. It has all the right numbers, the street presence, and it definitely makes all the right sounds. But as good as those features are, we're no longer in 1978. And in that light, it's hard to look past Holden's SS Commodore. It might not pack the same punch as the Falcon, but as an all-rounded sports sedan, it takes the cake.